I don't know that in terms of learning things about myself, my films are always an investigation of how I think and how I solve problems and logical issues, and developing logic from images and scenes that are sort of detached from any very obvious context. And so I'm always learning about the way that I think, the way that my mind processes ideas. And I would say up until recently, my work has never actually been very personal. Like, I don't really address like family life or like personal matters or like where I'm from. But lately, as things in my home country, which is the United States, have gotten more dire, I've found there's a bit of reason to I guess, investigate like where I'm from and what my family life was, and going back to my roots and like the situation of just being a person who grew up in Texas in the United States 40 years ago. And so things have gotten, I guess, a little bit more personal in a certain obvious way, but at the end of the day, I make films in order to understand the way that I process information, and delivering films so that the audience can kind of observe how I process information and organize images. I've actually shown in Punto de Vista before, and so that was the first time that I became familiar with Punto de Vista. It was in 2023. I had contributed to a collaborative film called A Woman Escapes that I made during the pandemic with two of my filmmaker friends, Sofia Bogdanovic and Barak Cevic. I wasn't able to come because I was busy at the time, and both of them are based in Europe, and so they came and told me how amazing it was. But yeah, my understanding of Punto de Vista is that it kind of participates in this tradition of exploring documentary film and films that depict reality, but in a more innovative way, or in a way that challenges the form of filmmaking and isn't just presenting like traditional depictions of the world as you might normally see them in documentary film or in a normal art house film, and the sort of standards of realist drama. And so, I mean, I think a film festival is always doing its best work when it's introducing audiences to films that, that the people overseeing the festival think are moving the medium forward, moving certain conversations about the way films are made and what films are made about forward, and introducing those to audience members who may frequent that festival every year, or they may just be going to the festival for the first time. It may be their first film festival of any kind. But showing audiences what film can be in a way that is perhaps probably different from what they already understand cinema can offer, just by going to see movies that are normally shown in releases at cinemas and multiplexes, because the films are always quite different. And I think that is extremely important. It's just to show an expanded horizon of what cinema is actually capable of, that it's not such a confined thing that we've already seen before, because there's so much that hasn't been seen or shown before. Well, the first 3D film that I ever made was in 2012, and I actually, when I first started making films in 3D at that time, I was making, first of all, they were found footage. I was making them in the anaglyph, which is the red and cyan, the red and blue format of 3D, and I was also making them in a way that was a little bit antagonistic towards 3D, because this was 2012, and so it was just in the immediate aftermath of Avatar playing and making like $2 or $3 billion, and also sort of throwing cinemas out of their practice of making of being able to show films on film, because a lot of cinemas had to sort of renovate in order to be capable of showing digital 3D, and they ended up getting rid of their 35 millimeter projectors. And so a lot of filmmakers stopped working in 35, a lot of films started being made in digital, things started looking cheaper and feeling cheaper. And so I was a little bit upset at the state of cinema and cinephilia and I guess the degradation of what cinema going had become in the aftermath of this big 3D wave that was coming. But over the course of making several 3D films and starting to buy 3D cameras and starting to see more innovative 3D films, such as in 2014 when Jean-Luc Godard premiered his Goodbye to Language in Cannes, and seeing how certain artists use it in very innovative ways, you start to understand that it's not just something that is about having objects thrown at you from the screen and pop out at you, and all these gimmicky things that just kind of distract from the fact that the movie that is on the screen is not very good. Is that the movies can be very interesting, and the things that they do with 3D can be very unusual and very stimulating in ways that you had never really imagined. And so I fell in love with the format probably about 10 years ago, and at that time I was also starting to, I had entered into a PhD program at the University of Toronto in the Cinema Studies Institute and started doing a dissertation on experimental 3D, which exposed me to the entire history of 3D, which is not just going back to the digital wave or the 1980s or the 1950s when it started showing up on the big screen from Hollywood productions, but also that there was just a long lineage of filmmakers who were working in the short form, and in the 1920s and the 1930s with the Lumieres and their experiments, and then into the avant-garde and the underground cinemas that continued making work and exploring depth in unorthodox ways that you would really had to kind of dive in to the archives of various film distributors in order to be aware that these films, one, existed, and also two, that they were even made for 3D and 3D glasses. And so it was, because it's such an underexplored area of cinema history, every time you learn something, it's like this explosion of possibilities that you become aware of. And so it's always very exciting. It's a very exciting field to investigate and to work in, because there's so many possibilities and so few things that have been done in that format. So it's very open. I liked Avatar when I saw it, and I even liked the second Avatar when it came out a few years ago. And so my interest in 3D cinema and 3D form is not only in the experimental realm. Like I think some of the greatest 3D films that have been made have been very theatrical and dramatic, like Alfred Hitchcock's Dial M for Murder in 1954, or Jaws 3D in the 1970s, and all the kind of schlocky action films that they were making at that time in 3D. But even films that you would maybe not associate with experimental cinema that were made in 3D, I think are quite experimental. Like even, I think, Werner Herzog's Cave of Forgotten Dreams documentary, which is just a documentary about one of the oldest caves in the world in France, and looking at cave drawings on walls. Like it's quite experimental in the sense that it's exploring images and it's exploring form as opposed to exploring empathy or character or story in ways that are more expected of a conventional cinematic form. And I think a lot of 3D films are inclined towards exploring image and form because that's kind of what they've chosen to do in their depiction of whatever it is that they're showing. You're showing something in 3D, and so you're showing it in a way where the audience will be very conscious of the image the whole time, which a lot of films that you go to see in the cinema, even in the art house, they don't really want the audience to focus on the image. They want to see through the screen as if it were a window and just see the scene and kind of immerse themselves in the dramatic flow of the story or the character development and things like that, which are all very good. But in a 3D film, even if it's a dramatic film, if it's a nature documentary, whatever it is, the 3D calls attention to itself. And so you're asking people to watch and observe images and think about the images and notice the images constantly. And that's something that you typically will only see in experimental cinema fields and in the avant-garde, is filmmakers who are showing images and they want the audience to consider the images as images rather than just something to see through. And yeah. When I was studying 3D and the trajectories that it's have, because it's something that has arrived in the 30s and 70s and then the 2000s. So I chose Forever Young as the title of the series because I've always referred to 3D as a Peter Pan format. And by that I mean it's never grown up. And part of that is the fact that any time that it's arrived and become popular in mainstream cinema, whether it's the 1950s or in the 70s and 80s or in the 2000s, it was really only popular and used for anywhere from 3 to 6 years, and then it would kind of disappear and you wouldn't see it again. And anytime a new format arrives, whether it's 3D or if it's color, Technicolor in the 1930s, or sound at the beginning of the 1930s, at the end of the 1920s, widescreen, CinemaScope. Anytime you have a new format that's arrived, the first instances of it being used are very youthful and demonstrative and very flamboyant, and they are really trying to show off what the new format is capable of. So the first color films were extremely saturated in color, and the color was very in your face, to the point where audiences were complaining that they couldn't focus on the movie because the color was so loud. Or the first instances of sound were using sound in such strange and overt ways that it really took you out of the dramatic space of the film. And so 3D also has this trait where anytime it comes, it has to kind of convince the audience. It feels like it has to convince the audience that that it's valuable, and it tries to do so by really putting itself in their face. So it has things popping out of the screen. Every scene is some sort of projectile or some sort of thing falling. And like the first 3D film that ever was made in Hollywood in 1952, which was called Buona Devil, like the motto of that film was a lion in your lap and a lover in your arms. So it's promising the movie kind of coming out at you. But unlike color and unlike sound and all these other formats that were introduced to cinema and then they became part of the dominant form and they stayed, 3D, it disappears. And then when it comes back, it hasn't reached that maturation stage that all the other formats tend to hit, where they become more subdued and grown up. And so one of the things that I like about 3D is that it's always very childlike and playful and not hiding itself and not self-conscious. Like it's really just trying to show itself in a way that's not trying to be mature. And so that is something that I wanted to carry over into the title of this series and show that it's okay for films to be playful and to have gimmicks like 3D in a way that is innovative and also scientific at the same time. Yeah. So there are actually 6 different formats that are used in the program. One is called autostereoscopic, so it means that you don't wear glasses, and that's just you have basically a flicker of 2 different images that are happening so fast that your brain sees both of them and sees a 3D image out of them. And so there are a couple of films that use that format in the program. The other 5 each have a different kind of glasses that you'll wear. So first of which is probably the most common and the people are most familiar with, which is they're often called polarized glasses or technically they're active shutter, but basically if you go to the multiplex, if you see Avatar, if you see a Marvel movie that's been post-converted into 3D, it'll probably be with this pair of glasses. And basically a 3D movie is created by filming a scene with two different lenses that are right next to each other, sort of mimicking the distance that your eyes are apart. And you end up with two different movies. And in order to see the movie back in 3D in the same way that you see the world in 3D, you have to deliver the images to the audience in a way that one of the movies will be shown to one eye and the other one will be shown to the other eye. And so these glasses filter out the images that are being projected on the screen in a way that does that in full color. There's also the anaglyph process, which is kind of the most iconic format of 3D, just because it's so distinctive and recognizable and almost cartoonish, because it has a red and a blue filter, and the blue is actually cyan, which is a combination of blue and green. But it basically does the same thing that the polarized glasses do, but it does it without fancy flickering lenses, and it just uses color filters. And so you filter out the images so that one is in red and one is in cyan, and then the glasses divide them up in that way and make sure that your eyes see two different images. There's also a format called Pulfric, which is basically just putting a dark filter over one of your eyes, and anytime there is horizontal movement on the screen, the eye that has the dark filter over it will have a slight delay in the light hitting it compared to the other eye. And so it will see that horizontal movement at a slightly different moment than the other eye will. And that creates a 3D effect, which is very unusual. And this was discovered by a German scientist in the early 1920s. And it's really cool to see that it's being utilized now for experimental 3D films. There's also a format called chroma depth, that we're using to show work that was made by a computer art pioneer named Lillian Schwartz. She was an animator working in the 1960s and 70s with computer animation, and she discovered in I think it was around 2011 or 2012, when she was wearing a pair of chroma depth glasses and watching a restoration of her film, that the glasses made her films 3D. And the way that they did this is that chroma depth are prismatic glasses that make certain colors seem further away or closer to you than they actually are. So when you have an animated film that uses a lot of very bright colors, and you wear these glasses, the red colors will appear closer to you than the rest of the colors, and blue things will appear further away from you. And so things that are very colorful will have different color planes that are coming out of the screen in very strange ways. And even though she was working on these films in the 1970s, and she didn't discover these glasses, which hadn't been invented until the early 90s, probably 40 years after she made them, she decided that she loved the way that these glasses made her films look so much that she wanted certain films that she had made to always be shown with these glasses. And so we're going to honor that and show some of her work with the chroma depth glasses. And then the last format is it's called Fireworks 3D, and it's called Fireworks 3D because it uses diffractive lenses, and they're typically sold, at least in the United States, at fireworks stands, so that when there's a big fireworks show, you can wear these, and it will make all of the different points of light in the fireworks kind of shoot off in these rainbow colors in every direction. And we're only going to use these for one film, which is Jody Mack's Let Your Light Shine, which is an animated film that was made about 12 years ago. But it's a black and white animated film with a lot of very fine details and fine points of light. And when you watch the film with these glasses, it really makes the whole film kind of explode all over the room in all sorts of different colors. And it's always a really big crowd pleaser, so it's a lot of fun.
Just to end our interview, I have one more question,
Yeah.
one last question. As a filmmaker, how do you approach an experimental 3D film? Does it start with a script, a narrative idea, or a visual concept, seeking like a 3D dimension vision that serves as a starting point or something? How can...
Well, I so far don't work with scripts or any sort of preconception over really anything with how I work. When I am making a film, it seems to almost always happen just by the film finding me rather than me conceiving of something and going out and creating it. And by that I mean I tend to just, I tend to travel and always have my cameras with me, and I film anything that seems compelling or interesting or particularly visually stunning, and end up just with a very large database of images that are created just out of my interest in them as a single image. And over a period of time, I noticed that certain images start to, they can, if they are placed next to other ones, they create certain tensions or charges between them, and I end up making sequences of images and liking how they play together, and then you have a sequence, and then you can put one sequence after another sequence, and then you end up with enough sequences and you have a movie. And I work in this way because I find that if I decide, oh, I want to make this film and I need to capture this image, and I need to, put these people in front of the screen, or I need to travel to this place and film this thing because I know exactly what I want, then when I go there, I never get what I want, and when I film something, it just becomes a reflection of something that I had wanted but wasn't able to get. And so in this way, I'm always getting what I want because I'm not trying to get anything in particular. I'm just trying to film. I just end up filming things that I find that are working. And so I end up only filming things that are working. And I trust that the sensibility that I have that motivated me to film all these different things will have some sort of unifying essence behind it that will unite it in a certain film. Of course, there are many things that I end up filming that never end up in a movie. And there's certain things that I filmed many years ago that I haven't used yet, but that I'm open to the possibility will end up in a film one day. And so I'm just always just waiting for the films to come and not rushing it.